Good. Am I right to be encouraged at this current direction? Will my optimism be rewarded?
One of those things. The other two are a lot tougher. Those are big boulders to be pushing. But the DeRozan, look, Andre Drummond, I tweeted it out, I've wrote he was going to be the first piece to go. That one was obvious. DeRozan, that relationship has disintegrated. The door obviously was open after the end of the season. The play-in loss to Miami. There's been some circumstances that led to some not ill feelings, but a change of heart. The Caruso trade was the final straw that made DeRozan say, "I do not like the direction." There was a lot of stuff behind the scenes too that went into that. But he will be signing elsewhere, so we can go ahead and close the chapter on the King of the Fourth. Then it gets really tricky. Ideally, they were hoping the dominoes were going to fall differently than they have. And that meant Orlando lacking an adult. They have since solved that. That meant the Clippers having a big hole to fill. Derrick Jones Jr. going there sort of hurts that. Detroit with Tobias Harris, they needed an adult. They seem to have gotten one. So the dominoes have not fallen the way Arturas Karnisovas needed them to fall in order for Zach LaVine to be a commodity. A couple of weeks ago, there was a growing momentum that there was going to be a suitor for Zach, but that has not worked out the way they've wanted it to, unfortunately.
How much do you think management has learned when it comes to the moves that they didn't make? Now, is that because Dan and I have been discussing this and debating it to a small degree on whether that's on management or if that's on ownership, that they didn't make the moves that they needed to make at both trade deadlines over the last 2 years?
Well, my frustration was at this trade deadline specifically. Look, I will on the record. I've always said the initial trade for Vucevic had to be done, and I backed that trade 100%. Re-signing him at that time by thinking continuity was the wrong way to go when they could have traded him last deadline. They didn't do that. This year they could have traded Andre Drummond and acquired second round picks, knowing that he was possibly going to walk. They didn't do that. Again, two factors. I don't think they value second round picks like some organizations do. And look, second round picks, I've said this before, are kind of like Bitcoin. They're the eye of the beholder. Some people think it's just not, they're nonsense and they lead to nothing. Others hold that second round picks is high currency. They can be moved for other things. So it depends on your front office's philosophy. But the other part of this is when your bosses tell you the push is for the playoffs and you need Andre Drummond for that push, it's hard to say, bunks the bosses. We're just going to go and do our own thing. And so I think they were kind of handcuffed a bit. Otherwise, I think they would have moved Andre Drummond. And look, the big kick in the rear in all of this is they felt pretty confident that there were teams interested in Zach LaVine at the trade deadline when Clutch Sports and Zach LaVine opted to have surgery. And the Bulls made that very clear in the press release, if you remember, that this is Zach LaVine and Clutch Sports opting to have the surgery. They felt they could rehab it and get him back on the court. And they were hoping that other teams would, when they gave them a physical, would see that as well. That really was a slap in the face of that relationship and why the Bulls are where they are right now, with the whole Zach and obviously not pulling the trigger because bosses kind of handcuffed them.
Now, Joe, I know that we're going to talk about some of the contracts signed over the weekend, which I do think were properly valued for what these pieces are. But there is a growing chorus of people saying, well, that Zach LaVine, a floor spacer, a shooter, exactly what they need, volume 3-point shooting with this. And I can't scream no loudly enough. And the reason is multiple. How do you do that to Kobe White? How do you finally? It finally looks like you're clearing the decks. You've got a pass first playmaker, young point guard to stand next to him. We know that he and Zach, for whatever reason, whatever you want to call the positions, however you want to parcel at the time, they don't coexist well. How can the big piece of this not be to just provide whatever it is more offensive oxygen and opportunity available to young developing players.
Dan, Dan, that's a great point, but there's a bigger sample size than just what you're throwing out. And I've been kind of thumping this on the table for years. Lauri Markkanen played his best basketball when it was Chris Dunn and Zach LaVine was out with an injury. Patrick Williams has played his best basketball when Zach LaVine has not been playing. And Kobe White has played his best basketball when Zach LaVine was out of the picture and DeMar DeRozan was Batman to his Robin. So this is just not a Kobe White thing. This has been an ongoing thing that for some reason, and it's not that Zach is a selfish player. I just think his IQ and his lack of playmaking and understanding when to get certain guys the ball. And because he's such a bad shot maker, there is no bad shot for him in his mind. And so I think he has stunted the growth of numerous guys that we've seen go on and do great things in other organizations or excel when Zach is out with an injury. So I don't think it's just a Kobe White thing, and that's tough. I mean, your starting five right now, as of today, is Josh Giddey, Kobe White, Zach LaVine. So who's going to be the three? Do you cross match? Do you look for a weakness? How are you going to handle that? Patrick Williams and Vucevic. Now that might be the group they want to run, because that will ensure that the Spurs do not get their top 10 pick, because that's just a layup line for the opposing teams. But as of right now, that's your starting five. And I think it does two things. You got Zach here as a hostage and not a volunteer. And secondly, you have him continually stunt the growth of guys that you are trying to push in this youth movement.
Do you think that the perception of Zach as a player, whether that perception has to do with people thinking that he maybe doesn't have the highest basketball IQ to go along with all of that incredible talent, is that why we're seeing, if you want to make a trade for him, the Bulls have got to attach something like it? Because I got to tell you, Joe, like the way that people have felt talking about Zach publicly makes me feel like there are a lot of people who don't think he's a great teammate.
The market tells you what they think of him. I mean, they can't unload this guy. And I wouldn't say he's a bad teammate. I think in the locker room, he's well liked. He has changed since he went to Clutch Sports. And I always compare this to, he was about the businessman and now he's about the businessman. So there is a difference in him as far as that and understanding what that generational wealth and that max contract has done. And then when you go to Clutch, they kind of emphasize of just how much of a business this is for you. So I do think there's not that love and joy of basketball that he used to have that you could feel and teammates could feel. It's more of a job for him now, which, I'm never one to judge a person's philosophy of why they're getting paid and how they're getting paid. But when you are pushing a youth movement, it's just a bad idea to keep that in the locker room. And, to your point, it's not just how the Bulls feel about him. The NBA has screamed for 2 years how they feel about him. And that's why, I did that sit down with him, and he tried to convince me years ago that he deserved the max. And it was all contingent on, look how I'm playing defense. Look how the defense I played for Team USA. Look at the defense I did at the time of that interview, the first, 5 weeks of the season. And so I was like, okay, we'll give you the benefit of the doubt if that defense is going to continue. And immediately after that, the defense went south. And then you're dealing with a Bradley Beal type guy who's one-dimensional. But I don't even think he has the playmaking skills and IQ of Bradley Beal. So it's been tough. And maxing him has proven to be a big boulder that they can't move now.
So let's talk about the deals that happened over the weekend. Patrick Williams agrees to come back on a relatively inexpensive deal for a young 3-and-D guy at the very minimum. Torrey Craig picks up his option, and they sign developing young, bespectacled center Jalen Smith away from the Indiana Pacers for 3 years and $27 million. What does that do for the front court?
Well, I mean, it gives them depth with Jalen Smith at center now. He'll be that small center that Billy likes to, go with that small lineup. So he likes that. He can space the floor. His per 36 rebounding is actually pretty good. I think it's near the 11 11 rank. I know it's 5.5 per game, but if you look at his per 36, it's a lot better than that. The Josh Giddey thing is he's going to be exciting. He's going to be a triple double threat on a nightly basis. My only concern with that whole press conference is he's like, yeah, basically they got rid of me because the team got really good and my role changed and I didn't fit anymore. Well, what if this team gets really good? You do not fit here? I mean, do you not do well on good teams? I mean, that made me a little nervous with him saying that. I think he was misspeaking a little bit, I'm hoping. So, and then the Patrick Williams thing, the best thing that happened for the Bulls is Patrick Williams got hurt because that really killed his value. I mean, to have a 22-year-old who's a 3-and-D guy, and to get him at that price is pretty good. And look, both sides wanted it to happen. I don't think Patrick Williams really wanted to leave. I think he likes the Bulls. He's comfortable there. So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely I think steps in the right direction. And especially to me, the caveat in all of this is, do these moves make you bad enough where you keep that top 10, 25 protected pick out of the Spurs' hands? Because if you do, then really you traded Caruso for Giddey and a first-round pick in 25, which you cannot get first-round picks in 25 from anyone. I don't care who you're offering up. If it's a team that feels like they're in the bottom 15, you can offer up the farm and they will not give you a 25 draft pick. A 25 first-round draft pick has not been put on the table for the Bulls in the last 3 seasons because NBA teams knew what was coming.
Do you think that there's more to Patrick Williams' game than what he's shown?
I'd like to say yeah, but I mean, how many times are we going to get fooled? You know what I mean? I'd like to say yes because there's flashes of it, but maybe he's just a guy that flashes and is inconsistent and always plays sometimes lethargic and sometimes wow. And that just might be his career. And the other side of it is he is a worker. He might not be Kobe White type worker, but if Kobe's the first one in, Patrick Williams is usually the second one in the gym. And if Kobe White's the last one to leave and shut off the lights, Patrick Williams is leaving just before Kobe. So
that's what makes me crazy, Joe, is that when we talk motor, there's 2 ways that NBA people talk about somebody's motor. One is once the game itself starts, and that's really important, and that's what we see. But some stuff that they see is what you're talking about that is indicative of a motor, of how early do you wake up? When do you go to sleep? When are you in the gym? I just wish that his outside the game motor was more evident in the game.
Yes. And that's the frustration with him. He's learned a lot of things. I think Billy Donovan tells a story about his first year with Patrick Williams. He noticed him eating a big, huge chicken parm before the game and then doing it the next game and the next game. And he went up to him finally. He's like, bruh, that's not a pregame type meal that you want to stuff yourself with, this big old fried chicken parm. And so then you have to realize he's an 18, 19-year-old kid, and this is just what he did. And so he's had to learn a lot of different things on how to grow up and be a man in the NBA. The hope is that they seem to feel that when he gets going early in games, he usually is more involved. And it's on them and it's on his teammates to make sure he stays that way. And that's why that goes back to the point of, does Zach LaVine care if Patrick Williams is involved in the game early on, or does Zach LaVine care about, I got to get